West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
All right, now to this. ProPublica out with new reporting this morning on Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. The organization has been leading the investigative reporting into Justice Thomas, having received luxury trips, real estate deals, and gifts from billionaire Harlan Crow over a 20-year period. Their newest report is regarding tuition payments for the grandnephew of Justice Thomas, who he was raising as his son. Joining us now, one of the ProPublica reporters on the story, Justin Elliott. Justin, thank you very much for joining us. This reporting is staggering. How much money are we talking about as it pertains to this tuition that the Republican donor was providing for the Supreme Court justice?
Yeah, so we don't have the full amount, but we're talking potentially in excess of $150,000. This was at two private boarding schools, one in Virginia and one in Georgia, that Justice Thomas sent his grandnephew, who he was raising as a son to.
Can I ask, Justin? I mean, here's just yet another example of Clarence Thomas getting financial benefits from a massive GOP donor. You read the Wall Street Journal editorial page on your reporting. You read the National Review, and they are shocked and stunned and deeply saddened, and said that this is just the left-wing media once again going after a public servant, a good conservative public servant. I'm sure you've read their critiques. Could you fill in some gaps that they maybe have left intentionally open?
Sure. So I'd say a couple things. One is that, we're reporting on the entire Supreme Court, and I'm contractually obliged to say by ProPublica that, if anyone has information about other justices, they should get in touch. But, but seriously, I mean, we just haven't found anything like this relationship between Crow and Thomas with any of the other justices at this point. I mean, we're talking about a billionaire political donor who's funding, multiple aspects of the life of a justice. This private school tuition, which the story we broke today, lavish vacations on his yacht and his private jet over 20 years. Harlan Crow owns the house where Justice Thomas's mother is living, apparently rent-free. So this is, we actually spoke to the former chief ethics lawyer for the George W. Bush White House, Richard Painter, who said that, basically never seen anything like this. And when he was in the government, if you had a staffer taking this level of undisclosed gifts, you'd want to get them out of the government.
So, Justin, obviously, Justice Thomas has not reported these tuition payments or anything else in his annual disclosure forms. You just mentioned the Bush White House lawyers, which seemingly rebuts some of the claims this is just a partisan effort here. So has Justice Thomas offered any explanation at all as to why he thought this was proper behavior?
So Justice Thomas did not respond to our questions for this latest story. He has released one statement in response to our first story about the travel that Harlan Crow has been providing him with, in which he said, look, I'm close friends with Harlan Crow, and I was advised by my colleagues that I didn't have to disclose this. They have not said, who gave him that advice or exactly what that advice was. And, all of the ethics lawyers we talked to say this disclosure law is quite clear that you just have to disclose gifts like this.
So, ProPublica reporter Justin Elliott, thank you very much for your reporting, and thank you for coming on this morning. And Joe, once again, it's really hard not to see how this Supreme Court justice was not exposed to having his objectivity impacted, let's just say it kindly, by all the gifts over the course of decades by a Republican donor. And then you add the fact, and again, we try and be objective ourselves, but it's hard not to notice his wife texting Mark Meadows, and completely involved in certain things that seem to be part of the big lie. And then you wonder what is going on.
Regardless of those who reflexively defend him, this has been a horrible 2.5 years for Justice Thomas's legacy. And for Republicans who are trying to dismiss this, I can't even begin to imagine what would happen if it were Justice Sotomayor, if it was Justice Kagan.
Please.
This is again, let's be really clear about this. Everybody at this table would be shocked and outraged and be critical if this were a liberal justice, a left-wing justice that was taking this. But Sam, it's just, again, there are no rules, it appears. There is nothing that people on the Trump right can do that is going to get condemnation from most Republicans. I mean, this is a sort of stuff. I can't even imagine if any federal judge that I practiced under had taken 1/100th of these sort of gifts. I can't imagine they wouldn't be up for impeachment.
You're talking about the need to be objective. I would argue it would be non-objective if we didn't treat this as the clear-cut, scandalous behavior it is. It doesn't matter whether he was appointed by a Republican president or as a conservative jurist. This is very evidently clear-cut, problematic ethics. And to your point, I thought about this a little bit. If it was associate or one of his clerks who, in the course of discovery, found out a big donor had secretly paid for that clerk's wife's tuition, that clerk would be tossed out of the court tomorrow. Yeah. If it was someone in our profession, imagine a reporter who quietly took $150 in benefits from a donor. That person would lose all credibility instantaneously and never be able to be in this profession. So, yes, we need to objectively assess the situation by noting clearly just how absurd and outlandish it actually is.
And it was not disclosed. That's the thing. Not disclosed. The annual disclosure form, Justice Thomas expects us to take seriously his reading of the subtlest nuances of our Constitution and what every clause means in the original and everything. Very, very carefully parsing that, and he also wants us to believe he can't understand the very simple instructions on a disclosure form.
It's ridiculous, and the court's doing nothing. John Roberts, who I've always said was an institutionalist, certainly not acting like an institutionalist now, because somebody that wanted to protect the institution with the Supreme Court's approval ratings at an all-time low would step forward and be far more active than this. This is something you just can't sit back and leave for vacation this summer and just hope it goes away. So if you're an institutionalist, David, and let me say again, I want to underline this fact. For the Chief Justice, the Supreme Court's credibility with the American people is at an all-time low.
So, Joe, I think you're right that this comes down to the Chief Justice. we really don't want a situation, Jackie, you cover Congress, where Congress is trying to legislate rules for another branch of government. It may come to that. But isn't this centrally Chief Justice Roberts' responsibility, that he's the person who can say, this reporting isn't partisan, this reporting is about the basics of accountability that every other judge in America has to deal with, and we do too. And here are the rules that I, as Chief Justice, am going to announce.
Yeah, well, interestingly, Judge Michael Luttig and Lawrence Tribe, who appeared before the Senate Judiciary Committee earlier this week, advised Congress that they could not pass a bill forcing the Supreme Court to impose their own set of rules, but under the Constitution, they were allowed to actually create a bill that outlined a code of conduct and then have that enforced by some independent arbiter. Right. And that is the bill.
Moving forward.
Exactly. And that is the bill that Lisa Murkowski and Angus King proposed last week. There is not any sort of unanimous consent about this bill in any way, but you did have Republicans and Democrats agree that this is problematic. But I will say, judges are still untouchable politically. Even when I'm thinking back to our reporting during the January 6th committee that investigated the attack on the Capitol, Liz Cheney privately did not want to touch Clarence Thomas. She's the most outspoken Republican against a lot of sort of the Democratic backsliding and issues that we've seen with the Republican Party. And she had said to her privately to staffers and investigators that she didn't want to touch Clarence Thomas's wife. She didn't want to continue to make that a spotlight, and she thought it was irrelevant to the investigation writ large. And a lot of her colleagues, Democrats at the time, felt like that was because she didn't want to be the Republican responsible for taking down Clarence Thomas.
What about Clarence Thomas, though? In fact, didn't he rule in a case that it was the lone dissenter?
Exactly.
That touched exactly on what his wife was involved in.
Failed to recuse himself once again.
It is Thursday, the 4th of May of 2023, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. A little bit of jambalaya, a little bit of spice in your life. Oh, spicy. Well, we have some good news here out in the mothership in Rogue River, Oregon. We have a new addition to the mothership family. My brother gifted a Yorkshire Terrier to my mother, our mother. And she is such a cute little thing. Her name is Precious, which is an appropriate name because she is such a precious little thing. Getting used to the gardens and the property and where she was staying with my brother. He lives more out in the country, and his setback is quite far from the road that you get to his place. So it's a bit more quiet out there, and we live in a town with, we got neighbors and dogs barking and the school bus backing up, chirping. You know, that backup chirp that it makes so people don't get run over, hopefully. And so there's all these noises and smells, and she's just curious about everything. And she's so tiny. That's the other thing, is that Ginger was old and knew where her parameters were. And this little thing is still learning, so she could slip through, like the gate, for instance. So I have a barrier there currently, but I'm going to have to engineer something and make that gate a little bit tighter so little dog buddies can't slip through. And we want to keep her in this yard. Anyway, she is quite a little thing, and we may have to have a bit longer clips today. I apologize, because I may have to run and make sure that she is taken care of, and if you know what I mean, you know what I mean. She's pretty well behaved and house trained, but still, it's a new place. She has to mark places. They do that, you know. Anyway, Gunner seems to like her, and that's good, because he's such a big dog. He could probably eat her, but he takes a while to eat. Anyway, My brother did intimate that actually it's better for Precious to be here because he has another dog, which is more of a puppy and a bit more rambunctious and big, and it could be a danger to the little dog, Precious. And though Gunner likes to play, he's gentle around. He and Ginger got along famously. And one thing that's kind of funny is that he's such a gentleman that he would always step back and allow Ginger to go in a door first, for instance. And mostly because she was the dog that was here when he came here. Now it's sort of funny because the little dog, Gunner, will step back for her to go through, and she kind of hesitates a little bit, and she takes a step back, and then he goes through, and I guess there's a power shift in the family. Hope it doesn't go to his head. No, we'll keep him in check. But that's that kind of news, and as I said, if I have to attend to her, we may have to have some longer clips. And that's that. So that stated, why don't we go ahead and get ready to fill you in on what we have in store for you in the Bistro Cafe as we start off here. In West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays, yeah, Harlan Crow paid at least $150,000 for Justice Thomas's grandnephew to attend private school, a grandnephew he was raising as a son. Interesting. Didn't seem or deem it important to file that, let anyone know. Now, every time Clarence Thomas says that colleagues on the court told him he didn't need to report that, I think that was Scalia. Wasn't that Scalia who probably said that? I'm sure. He told him, he filled him in on what he could report and not report while Clarence had to get Fat Tony. That's what people affectionately referred to him as, Fat Tony. Clarence had to get Fat Tony coffee every morning for about 10 years. But he learned from the master, didn't he? Yes, he did. And I mean that with all puns intended. On the rest of the menu, a former FBI supervisor was arrested in Oregon in connection with the January 6th insurrection. Yes, there's something odd about how many FBI agents really liked what was going on January 6th. In fact, it might be considered frightening. A Wisconsin judge is set to hear arguments in a lawsuit challenging the state's 174-year-old abortion ban. And Michelle Obama launches a new company to improve child nutrition. And people are going to hate that just because it's Michelle Obama. After the break, we move to the chef's table where Hungarian police tear-gassed teenagers at a protest against Orban's education reforms. And Canada's spy agency withheld information about Chinese threats against a Canadian lawmaker and his family. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. Across the page to the left from that chat room link is the link to our Patreon page. And we could use the help in paying our bills. So if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, it really does help. So thank you to those of you who have done so and allowed us to fulfill our civic duty as the founders originally intended so many years ago. And we're continuing because of that generosity and your continued generosity. Thank you. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, Mastodon, and Spoutable, you can do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of those. Thank you, Tom. Follow me on Twitter, Mastodon, and Spoutable at Justice Putnam. I post those show notes and links diaries on Daily Codes 10 minutes before showtime, but you can always get to the show notes and links diaries by going to the links provided on my social media feed. So go there. Do it. You can also follow the show on Twitter, such as it is, at Cookbook West, and please do pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, etc., etc., etc. Okay, this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is by Tom Jackman out of the Washington Post. A former supervisory agent for the FBI has been arrested in Oregon after the government alleged he entered the Capitol on January 6th of 2021 and confronted police outside the building telling them, "You are the Nazi. You are the Gestapo. Shame on you." What? Jared L. Weiss, age 50, was a special agent and supervisory agent for the FBI from 2004 to 2017, according to an affidavit filed in federal court in D.C. last month. The FBI declined to provide any information on Weiss's years with the agency or comment on his arrest. A tipster contacted the FBI in January of 2022 and reported that Weiss had been inside the Capitol during the riot in 2021. Sounds like an ex-wife. And FBI agents obtained cell tower records showing that Weiss's phone had been in use around the Capitol on January 6. The FBI then reviewed Capitol surveillance video and police body camera footage. The surveillance video revealed Weiss entering the building through the Senate wing door at 2:23 p.m., around when rioters first breached the Capitol. I think they're called insurgents, or maybe they were just insurrectionists at that point. He was seen walking around the building and then leaving 9 minutes later. Then, nearly 2 hours after that, D.C. police body cam footage captured Weiss facing off with police outside the Upper West Terrace. "You guys are disgusting," Weiss is recorded saying. I'm former law enforcement. You're disgusting. You are the Nazi. You are the Gestapo. You can't see it. Shame on you. Shame on you. Shame on you." Wow. When they turn hard, don't they? Weiss at the time lived in Texas, but moved last year to Bend, Oregon. He was arrested there on Monday and made his first court appearance, where he was charged with 4 misdemeanors, including entering a restricted building and impeding government business. Misdemeanors? At his first court appearance, he was released on a signature bond. Court records show there was no indication he would be transferred to D.C. for future proceedings. Most misdemeanor defendants in January 6 cases are not held in jail. Public records indicate that Weiss formerly served in the Washington field office of the FBI and was involved in public corruption investigations in the 2000s. At least 20 former or current members of law enforcement have been arrested in the January 6 riot. It is not a riot, it's an insurrection. Please. The longest sentence yet imposed in any of the more than 440 cases concluded so far was issued to Thomas Webster, a former New York City police officer who fought with police at the Capitol and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Thomas Robertson, a then active police officer from Rocky Mount, Virginia, received more than 7 years for his role in the insurrection. Rod Richmond of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. A Wisconsin judge is set to hear arguments today in a lawsuit challenging the state's 174-year-old abortion ban, a statute held in abeyance for nearly 5 decades until this U.S. Supreme Court struck down Roe v. Wade last year. State Attorney General Josh Cowell, a Democrat, filed a lawsuit in Dane County Circuit Court last June seeking to repeal the ban. Cowell argues that the 1849 law is so old it was essentially adopted without the people's consent, or alternately, that narrower restrictions on abortion enacted in Wisconsin in 1985 supersede the older statute. The 1985 legislation permits terminating pregnancies up until a fetus can survive outside the womb, while the older law outlawed abortion except to save the mother's life. Cowell initially sued Republican legislators, but later dropped them from the case and named 3 district attorneys as defendants, seeking to prohibit them from enforcing the ban. Today's hearing before Circuit Judge Diane Schlipper is expected to focus on a motion by one of the prosecutors named, Republican Joel Urmanski, a Sheboygan County's district attorney who has vowed to prosecute anyone violating the ban, has asked the court to dismiss the case. Urmanski argues that Cowell lacks standing to sue because the abortion ban doesn't hurt him. Urmanski also rebuts Cowell's argument that the ban is unenforceable because it's so old. State laws don't lose their effect through disuse, Urmanski said. The judge was not expected to immediately rule, but she could lay down a timeline for her decision. The case carries so much weight that no matter what happens in Schlipper's courtroom or at the appellate level, it will most certainly end at the state Supreme Court. That plays to Cowell's advantage because liberal-leaning justices will hold a 4-3 majority on the court after Milwaukee County Circuit Judge Janet Proteskowitz is sworn in this August. Brings us this final offering in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Michelle Obama announced yesterday, Wednesday, that she has co-founded a new company to make and sell healthier food and drinks for kids, products that she says will be less detrimental to their long-term health because of their lower sugar and higher nutrient content. The former First Lady's work with Plessy Nutrition is an extension of her efforts to improve child nutrition when she was in the White House. I've learned that on this issue, if you want to change the game, you can't just work from the outside, she said during a keynote address in New York at a conference on the future sponsored by the Wall Street Journal. You've got to get inside. You've got to find ways to change the food and beverage industry itself. So today I'm proud to announce the national launch of a company designed not just to provide better products, but to jumpstart what I hope will be a race to the top that will transform the entire food industry, she said. Mrs. Obama said she is the co-founder and strategic partner of Plessy Nutrition. She will work behind the scenes on its educational and philanthropic efforts, according to Aides, who stressed that she will not be a spokesperson or public face of the company. It was unclear whether she put any money down to help launch Plessy Nutrition or whether she will draw a salary. Is it Plessy or Pleasy? Maybe it's Pleasy. As First Lady, Mrs. Obama sought through a White House initiative called Let's Move to improve the health of U.S. children. And remember when Rush Limbaugh said it was a commie plot? I do. And she wanted to encourage children to engage in physical activity and eat healthier food. Well, looking at Rush Limbaugh, he didn't want any of that, and look how he turned out. She worked to improve federal nutrition standards for school lunches and extracted commitments from food companies and restaurant chains to cut calories, salt, sugar, and trans fats in their meals. But she said that kids still are not getting the recommended levels of nutrients and are eating and drinking too much added sugar, an average of 53 pounds per year. Sugary drinks are youngsters' main source of added sugar, adding that nearly 2/3 of them have such a drink every day. Pleasy Nutrition, based in the District of Columbia, is a public benefit corporation, meaning that the for-profit company was created specifically for the public's benefit and will balance its profit needs with its mission to help improve child nutrition. Mrs. Obama also announced that the company is donating $1 million to an initiative by Food Corp, a nonprofit organization that is working to help all 50 million students in the U.S. receive education about nutrition and free school meals by 2030. Pleasy Nutrition will also contribute 10% of its profits to the broader movement to improve child nutrition. Well, that brings us to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
You're listening to Science Quickly. I'm Jeff Delvisio. Now, we're not sure about all of you, but for us here on the show, some days we just want to explore. The unknown still exists all around us, and we have the super sweet day job of talking to folks who plumb the depths of those mysterious places. Today, I'm joined by two explorers, and they literally seek out the deepest unknowns there are on this earth. Karen Lloyd is a microbiologist at the University of Tennessee, though she's soon to be at the University of Southern California. And Peter Barry is a geochemist and volcanologist at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. Hi, Karen. Hi, Peter.
Hey.
Hey, Jeff. So thank you for joining us today. So maybe let's start off with this. Tell us about unknown places that you love the most and you seek out. Peter, why don't you go first?
Sure, yeah. So I am a volcanologist and geochemist, and I love to work in volcanic systems and hot springs all around the world. And what we try to do is visit different places where there's natural volcanic emissions. So there's gas, there's fluid coming to the surface. And what I do is I can collect those gases and those fluids, and I can bring them back to my laboratory here in Massachusetts, and we can measure the chemistry of those systems. I specialize in measuring stable isotopes, things like carbon and helium and other stable isotopes. And we can basically fingerprint these different volcanic systems to understand where the fluids and the gases and the material are coming from within Earth's deep interior. And I love traveling to subduction zones all over the world. And it's amazing that we see totally different signatures depending on where we go.
Very cool. Karen, what about you?
I was just thinking that it's really ironic that the place that we just got back from a couple of weeks ago was very high altitude. You think you want to go deep inside the Earth, which is the thing we want to do, because that's where the unknown is. There's so little that we know about what's inside Earth's crust. It's just hard to dig down to. You can't see through Earth. You can't drop something off the back of a ship and like we can in the oceans, you have to drill, and that's expensive and it takes years of preparation. So one thing that Peter and I have been doing, and our colleagues, is using natural hot springs that sort of take some of that deep subsurface environment and shoot it all back up to the surface. And we try to take these fluids as they come directly out of the ground. So where we were most recently was in the Puna region in Jujuy in Argentina with our colleague Agostina Chiodi. And so she's fantastic. She just planned out this entire trip. It was such a heavy lift, but we drove all around. I think we drove over 8,000 kilometers in 10 days or something like that, just sampling hot springs everywhere, dealing with splitting headaches and the nausea that comes from living above 15,000 feet every single day for 10 days in a row with no lead in, no acclimatization. But we got some great samples, but I love that irony of to go deep, we have to go high.
You're talking about two things that seem sort of not to be related if you're not kind of looking closely. One is sort of deep rock stuff, and then the other is, microscopic life stuff. So, how did you guys sort of get together, scientifically speaking? Why are you working together if it seems like your disciplines are so different?
Can I do it? No, you want to do it?
You can do it, Karen. Go ahead.
I had been thinking for years, I need to figure out what's happening with microbes in the crust. And what I need is a geologist who actually wants to work with me and talk to me and is not like, oh, well, that's an interesting project. Good luck. But actually will stick with me and help me. And I went to this meeting in 2015 and I had never met Peter before. And he just pitched to the room this idea of combining deep subsurface and microbiology with geology. And I was just I made a beeline. I ran over to him as soon as he stopped talking. I was like, I want to do this.
Yeah, I remember this conference, and it dawned on me as I looked around the room that it's really kind of critical to not only have a geological perspective like I have, but also understand what's happening from a biological perspective and try to link those up.
Is there life down in the crust? It seems inhospitable in a lot of different ways, but is that true?
It only seems inhospitable if you have a narrow view of how life can exist on this earth. If you expand your understanding of the temperatures that life can handle or the types of elements that life can breathe, then suddenly a lot more habitable space on this planet opens up to you. Right now, our estimates are that there are about 10,000 times more living cells in Earth's crust than there are number of stars in the universe. So this is now a really significant biome on Earth, and it's largely unknown. We're still asking really basic questions about it. So it's really fun to be asking fundamental questions in an environment that's so important for Earth, but we just don't know about it.
How does it compare to life on the surface, like biomass? Is there way more down there than there is up here?
So the way to put it in the context of the total biomass on Earth is that these are small cells. So they're much smaller biomass than what we have at the surface, because just think about where the energy sources are coming from. At the surface, we've got this gigantic blazing sun that basically powers trees and grass and stuff. So we definitely have more total living biomass on the surface than we have in the subsurface. I want to be clear about that. But the stuff that's in the subsurface is not just sad little crusts of life clinging to what falls down that they can eat the leftovers of the dead animals and stuff. There is that too. But there's additional sources of energy that are inside our Earth that are supporting a separate ecosystem.
It's a heck of a lot of stuff we didn't know was there, living stuff. How do you think about life as it exists in the crust?
We tend to think of life as being oriented around sunlight and seasons and day-night cycles because we are addicted to the sun. We need all that energy to support our big, hot bodies. But this separate ecosystem in our Earth's crust is supported instead by energy coming from chemical reactions in Earth's crust. The two really big things are that they are independent of the timescales that we have up at the surface, which creates for some crazy long-lived things. And the other thing is that they are very diverse in what they can breathe. So we breathe oxygen. That's it. Every animal breathes oxygen. When plants breathe, it's during the day they make oxygen, but they also breathe at night. So they breathe oxygen. So up here, we're all like a one-trick pony. And in the subsurface, suddenly transition metals in the middle of the periodic table like become active for them. They can use all this stuff. There are microbes that can breathe palladium and copper and nickel and antimony and vanadium and selenium and all these things, and arsenic. That's something that's very toxic to us, but for them it's like oxygen. There's even an organism that can breathe carbon dioxide, like breathe it as in, reduce it in their cells to get energy. Whereas for us, it's an end product. It's literally our waste. We can't do anything with CO2.
Aha, carbon dioxide. So, Peter, as the geochemist here, how do you think about what you study and the carbon at the surface and what could be done with it at depth?
I try to understand what's happening from like a geological carbon cycle, how much carbon's coming out of volcanoes, how much is going back into the Earth's interior due to subduction processes and plate tectonic processes. And then that gives you a baseline for understanding what's happening with human emissions. We're not necessarily studying how these microbes could be used to sequester the carbon we have. We're just making like that first order link between, the natural geological carbon cycle and where that carbon resides, where it could be trapped in Earth's crust, both due to geological processes and due to biological processes. Only in the last, 5-10 years have people really been focused on, how could you potentially pull some of that carbon out? And how could you sequester it? How could you put it in these depleted oil and gas reservoirs and store it for long geological periods? So you're basically flipping it around of, instead of how quickly can you extract it and burn it, how quickly could you sequester it and put it back in to sort of balance the system?
Well, one important thing to know is that there are natural deposits of CO2. If we put down stuff in the form of carbon dioxide, there's precedent for that. So this is not so completely unnatural. You can see it as like a giant machine with lots of knobs and turning points, and a lot of those have big question marks on them right now. What does it take to tune the system to do what we want? How do we engineer things in the deep subsurface? And that just is going to take a lot more work, like what we're doing and what other people are doing, to see what's down there right now and what kinds of things they do.
I wanted to leave our listeners with a little bit of wonder. If you had one thing you could tell them about the world we don't know under our feet, what would it be?
We've really only understood plate tectonics for the last 50 or so years. And we have carbon and water and other volatiles moving between the Earth's surface and interior in this very dynamic system. Earth is incredibly unique. And then seeing how that is actually influencing this really rich biology and microbiology that people like Karen study is absolutely fascinating to me, because I have no doubt that the two are ultimately connected, and it's what makes this planet so unique.
I think almost all of them are on deep branches of life that we don't know anything about. So we're talking about things that are as different from us as like a sponge, or even more different from us than a sponge, like something that like a slime mold versus us. And there's like hundreds of them. So that means that there's all these lineages that have been evolving to do something interesting or wonderful or strange or different. And we literally don't know what they're doing. Like, we have no idea what they're doing. So it's almost like having aliens here on Earth with us. They're not aliens. They're related to us. They're from Earth, but we just don't know anything about them. They're as unknown to us as an alien would be.
That's great. And to all of you listeners yearning for more microbe, Karen and Peter have been rendered as adorable cartoon scientists in a film that we have on Siam right now called Unearthed. We'll put a link to it in the transcript notes. FYI, it features a Scotch-laden subsurface microbe named Mick, and it's well worth the 5 minutes of your time.
For example, our buddy Mick, he's from about a mile below the Mariana Trench.
People hear that I live under the Earth's crust and they're like, but you know what? I'm just a regular dude. Mick the microbe. Mickey. I just happen to live inside the Earth. And we got a different way of doing things down there.
Thanks for chatting with us today, Karen and Peter. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks a lot, Jeff.
Science Quickly is produced by me, Jeff Del Vicio, Kelso Harper, and Talika Bose. Our theme music was composed by Dominic Smith. Like and subscribe to Science Quickly wherever you get your podcasts. And for more science news and long reads, head to Siam.com. For Science Quickly, this is Jeff Delvecchio.
Ready for our little forest adventure?
Yes!
So much waiting for me. Yeah, I wanna go outside. I wanna be.
We're here.
Whoa, that was fast.
There's a forest closer than you think. Find a park or forest near you and music inspired by nature. DiscoverTheForest.org. Brought to you by USDA Forest Service and the Ad Council.
Wake up and text. Text and eat. Text and catch the bus. Text and miss your stop. Wait. Text and be late to work. Sorry, I'm late. Text and work. Text and pretend to work. Text and act surprised when someone calls you out for not working.
Who, me?
Text and meet up with a friend you haven't seen in forever.
Hi.
Oh, hey.
Text and complain that they're on their phone the whole time. Text and listen to them complain that you're on your phone the whole time. Text and whatever. But when you get behind the wheel, give your phone to a passenger. Put it in the glove box. Just don't text and drive. Visit StopTextsStopWrecks.org. A public service announcement brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
Hi, it's Tom. Could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com? All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. And it doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage. Because you are our biggest donor. netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
"20 years after the United States government began locking up people in Guantanamo Bay, why are prisoners still there, not yet having had a trial?" I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. Some are in Gitmo because although they've been cleared for release, that is, they've been found to not pose a danger, they can't be returned to their home country. Others are there because they were so relentlessly tortured that a trial isn't possible, so they just sit. George W. Bush, whose administration set up the Gitmo detention facility, by the end of his second term said, quote, he very much wanted to close Gitmo. Barack Obama, early on, committed to closing it, but he didn't. Donald Trump said that Gitmo was a good way to deal with, quote, bad dudes, and signed an executive order to keep it open. President Joe Biden, in contrast, early on said he wanted to close Gitmo, but that hasn't happened yet either. It's time. It's past time that the administration figured out how to make that happen. After all, how can the United States stand as a beacon for the rule of law when our prison in Guantanamo still holds prisoners day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, decade after decade, with, for most, no trial and no end in sight? The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1886. That evening, a workers' rally in Chicago, Illinois, became known as the Haymarket Tragedy. On May 1st, workers across the city and around the country held massive rallies for the 8-hour workday. 2 days later, the police had fired into a crowd of workers on strike outside the McCormick Reaper plant in the Chicago neighborhood of Pilsen. 2 workers were slain and
many more were injured. Angry workers called a rally at the city's Haymarket Square to protest the police violence and to call for the 8-hour day. When the police attempted to disband the rally as it was ending, an unknown person threw a dynamite bomb into the ranks of the advancing police. In their confusion, the police began firing their weapons. A total of 7 policemen were killed and an unknown number of workers were struck. In the aftermath of the bombing, union offices and labor papers were raided throughout the city. 8 vocal supporters of the workers' movement were put on trial. 4 of the men, Albert Parsons, August Spies, George Engel, and Adolf Fischer, were sentenced to death by hanging. A 5th man, Louis Ling, died under mysterious circumstances in prison. Historian Bill Edelman explained the importance of Haymarket, saying, "No single event has influenced the history of labor in Illinois, the United States, and even the world more than the Haymarket Affair. It began with a rally on May 4th, 1886, but the consequences are still being felt today." Although the rally is included in American history textbooks, very few present the event accurately or point out its significance. Throughout the world, the Haymarket martyrs are remembered, and May Day is celebrated as International Workers' Day. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 50 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting highs in the low to mid-60s, overcast with rain showers at times, winds out of the west-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour, and then overcast tonight with rain showers, lows in the mid to upper 40s, winds out of the west at 5 to 10 miles per hour, and then considerable cloudiness tomorrow with occasional rain showers throughout the day, highs near 60, winds out of the west-southwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Grass pollen is rated high in our little village of Rogue River. The air quality index for the region is in the good range at 19 parts per million, and that daytime UV index is very high at level 8. So take care. It may look like it's overcast. It'll still burn you to a crisp. Barometric pressure is holding steady at 29.82 inches. Visibility is up to 10 miles, and relative humidity is at 84%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world, and that's why it's called the Weather Underground. London is 61 degrees and mostly cloudy. Paris is 73 with showers in the vicinity and a warning for thunderstorm activity that could impact critical electrical infrastructure. Rome is 75 degrees and fair. Kyiv is 64 and cloudy. Kabul is 60 degrees and partly cloudy. Hong Kong is 80 degrees and partly cloudy. Tokyo is 65 and clear. Sydney, Australia is 55 degrees and partly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 52 degrees and cloudy. And New York is 54 degrees Fahrenheit and cloudy. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Boldazar Giori of Reuters brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. Hungarian police fired tear gas at teenagers and detained 5 people at a rally outside Prime Minister Viktor Orban's offices yesterday, Wednesday, after a protest against a new law that would eliminate teachers' public servant status. The police action follows a 1,000-strong rally in central Budapest earlier on Wednesday after legislation that would significantly increase teachers' workload. The protest was the latest in a series of demonstrations over the past year for better working conditions for teachers. Police said the decision to fire tear gas at protesters was triggered by a breakaway group of participants of the afternoon rally that was marching at Orban's offices, breaking up barricades around a nearby construction site and pelting policemen with debris. A Reuters correspondent on the scene said police officers were reviewing footage of the incident to identify protesters suspected of wrongdoing. That's a nice way of saying they confiscated their cameras. In power since 2010, nationalist Orban has clashed bitterly with the EU over democratic norms as the Hungarian leader tightened restrictions on NGOs, media, academics, and judges and cracked down on the rights of migrants and gays. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Almost 5,000 teachers have already said they will leave their profession if a so-called status law comes into force, but Orban's government is going ahead with the reforms that would strip teachers of some of their job security. Over the past year, teachers have demonstrated and gone on strike for higher wages as Hungary's inflation, running above 25%, erodes salaries that were already below the national average and second to last among OECD countries. Many critics refer to the proposed law as the revenge law, perceived as punishment for teachers' year-long resistance. I am entirely against the law, which is not called the revenge law in public discourse by accident, said Caitlin Torley, one of the most vocal critics of Orban's education policies. It is a response to the wave of protests seen over the past year, which have exposed the dire problems of the public education system. According to a former version of the draft, teacher behavior and communications would have been monitored by technical means. Although the government promised to remove this and other minor provisions from the measure, negotiations are still ongoing between the government and the teachers' trade unions.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Ismail Shakil of Reuters brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Canada's spy agency withheld information about Chinese threats against a Canadian lawmaker and his family in 2021, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said yesterday, Wednesday, adding that he had told the agency that in the future, such threats must be revealed immediately. The Canadian Security Intelligence Service, otherwise known as the CSIS, had determined that information about the threats against Michael Chong, a member of Parliament with Canada's main opposition Conservative Party, were not concerning enough to inform him, Trudeau told reporters in Ottawa. Chong has said he found out about the threat to his family in Hong Kong from a newspaper and slammed the Trudeau government for inaction after the Globe and Mail newspaper reported on the threats on Monday. Canadian media outlets have published several reports citing anonymous intelligence sources alleging schemes run by Chinese government to interfere in Canada's last two elections. Beijing has denied those allegations, saying it has no interest in interfering in Canada's internal affairs. Sure. Trudeau has previously said China attempted to meddle in 2019 and the 2021 votes, but did not change the outcome. He appointed an independent special investigator to probe the allegations. Trudeau said he learned about the threats against Chong from the Globe report, and upon inquiring about it, found out that CSIS had decided to withhold the information. Going forward, we're making it very, very clear to CSIS and all our intelligence officials that when there are concerns that talk specifically about any MP, particularly about their family, those need to be elevated, Trudeau said. Chong was sanctioned by Beijing in 2021 after his motion passed the Canadian Parliament declaring China's treatment of the Uyghur Muslim minority as genocide. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we will meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. À fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair. T'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.